بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الخلق أجمعين سيدنا محمد عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. Welcome everybody. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless you and to bless your families, bless your health, and bless your faith, inshallah. On behalf of the Muslim Chaplaincy at the University of Windsor, I would like to welcome every one of you. Jazakumullah khairan for attending and for sharing this time with us. I also would like to give a very special thank you for our Sheikh Dr. Hooman Keshavarzi khairan for accepting to join us in this event and for accepting to share with us his knowledge and wisdom about one of the very important and significant topics that are very needed for our community in general and specifically for our youth and university students in particular. Just a brief introduction of Sheikh Hooman. He's licensed as a psychotherapist, and he also holds a doctorate of clinical psychology, a master of clinical psychology, and a bachelor of science, a specialist psychology track, minor in Islamic studies as well. He's currently a visiting scholar of Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul in Turkey. He's adjunct professor at American Islamic College in Hartford Seminary, and also an instructor of psychology at Islamic Online University and founding director of Khalil Center. And I'm sure that Khalil Center, mashallah, is very widely known. It's the first, not one, actually, it's the first Islamically oriented professional community mental wellness center and the largest provider of mental health care in the US specifically. And now, alhamdulillah, they have also a branch in Canada as well, which is very fortunate to have that, alhamdulillah. Mashallah, Dr. Hooman has a lot of positions and titles. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him and bless his work. It's not enough to introduce him in just like short words, speaking about his accomplishments and contributions to the academic field, to the Muslim community field. Mashallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him and bless his work, inshallah. And again, I'm really grateful and pleased to have him in this event, inshallah. Just to try to make the best use of the time, and it's a very broad topic and a very important topic as well, and I'm not going to really speak much. I just want Dr. Hooman to, inshallah, benefit us with his knowledge. My role here is just a facilitator for the entire discussion, inshallah. Probably I would ask some questions that I think are usually posed by Muslim students, specifically on pressing questions in the Muslim community in general. But I think a logical beginning of the event or the session would be a question about the title of the event itself. When we talk about addictions or we talk about specifically behavioral addictions, I would really like to hear, Dr. Hooman, to hear your thoughts on what is the meaning of addiction, or specifically the meaning or the definition of behavioral addictions, and is there a kind of a self-diagnosis process or method that a person can follow or use to know if he or she is actually struggling with some sort of addiction, inshallah. Barakallah fikum.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi wahdahu wa salatu wa salamu ala man la nabiyya ba'da. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Subhanaka la 'ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal 'alimul hakim. Rabbana zidna 'ilman wa 'amal. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I too wanted to extend my gratitude and appreciation, to all of you who are joining on a Sunday afternoon, and to Sheikh Yousef, who's hosting us, mashallah, at the Muslim Chaplaincy at the University of Windsor. Mashallah, I had the great privilege and honor of being able to meet the esteemed Sheikh in the at one of my visits to Windsor, where I was invited, and we shared kind of a stage to speak to various different issues at a conference. And alhamdulillah, we were able to also enjoy some lunch together afterwards, and to get acquainted with one another and acquainted with some of the work that we do. And I think we found some common interests. And so mashallah, I'm happy to be here again and to formally accept this invitation that you've provided me. So coming to the topic at hand, before I do so, I wanted to say that my hope was actually a lot more of an active engagement, Sheikh, that you might have. You said that you'd sort of step aside and have and be more of a questioner, but I think given your background in training and work and role, I think you have a lot more to offer than just the question, but rather I see this more of a discussion between us, inshallah, and that also lowers my anxiety knowing that we have an opportunity to sort of discuss some topics together that I think we, in differing roles with great degrees of overlap, will probably address in the work that we do in different spaces, different roles, but a lot of overlapping and similar concerns and issues that are arising, I think, that we're trying to tackle together. So I can benefit, I think we can benefit from one another's experiences, inshallah.
Barakallahu Sheikh. Don't worry, probably I will bother you with my questions, so don't worry, I'm going to be here questions every now and then, inshallah. Barakallah.
So to the question of behavioral addictions, how does one know when one has sort of a behavioral addiction? How do we sort of classify and understand a behavioral addiction? I think we can put it really simply and plainly, and the behavioral addiction is this feeling where you feel pulled to do a behavior that almost becomes automated and programmed, that you yourself recognize is not healthy or beneficial for you. Right? So there's sort of a discrepancy between what your intellect, your mind, your aql tells you as to what is beneficial and good for you, and what you feel pulled to do and engage in that provides usually some degree of one of two things. One is either pleasure, right? Usually temporary or short-term pleasure, or absence of discomfort, right? Trying to get away from sort of discomfort. Right, and this is where we sort of talk about compulsive behaviors, right, that we start to engage in that either provide us some sort of satisfaction and enjoyment, temporary pleasure. Tell our mind that this is a temporary joy that probably has long-lasting effects, right? It's one of the functions of the intellect, the aql, according to Islamic scholars, is التمييز بين الحق والباطل، تمييز بين الضار والمنافع, right? The being able to distinguish and differentiate, or معرفة عواقب الأمور, right? Being able to delay gratification and knowing the harms and benefits of something. And when we are not able to listen to that conscience and feel a sense of incongruence and tension in ourselves, that usually means that we're probably addicted to something, and need to kind of sometimes use some strategies to be able to kind of get away from it. And obviously this kind of cuts across all sorts of examples, right? We can think about food, we can addiction to food, we can think about addiction to comforts, we can think about addiction to social media, socializing, for example, and all of the above, which I think a lot of these things, in light of the context of the pandemic, might be kind of going up, especially since we are trying to, what I term, kind of a self-medicating, right? People are utilizing these temporal joys, right, or pleasures to accommodate for what feels like a imbalance where we're sort of having limited access to the usual things that we might be accustomed to, be it socializing, being outside, be it engaging in conferences and halaqats and going to restaurants and walking down the street in downtown metropolitan cities and whatnot, that all pose these difficulties where we feel a sense of depletion. No.
Yeah. Speaking of the pandemic point, Sheikh, and that was actually one of the points that I've been thinking about as well. And it's a common question for sure. Everybody's talking about the pandemic and the effect or the impact of the pandemic on mental health, or and also for sure on spirituality, which is a point that I would really like to address with you as well later, inshallah. what's interesting to me is my initial thought, and I'm not really expert whatsoever in this field, but my initial thought when I thought about the probably some sort of a clinical impact on the mental health from the pandemic perspective, I thought it's going to be majorly negative, right? That would be, there was a decline for a lot of people, if not all the patients who have any sort of a struggle with mental health issues. But I remember I came across an interview with one of the doctors, and again, I'm not saying really an authority here, just like sharing some really layman reflections on this. The doctor was saying that she has multiple patients with mental health struggles, and she can actually notice different trends among those patients. Some of them are actually doing better in the pandemic times, making use of some sort of self-isolation or making use of some sort of any sort of self-assessment, or regaining some certain spiritual or emotional traits or qualities for people, which is, I understand it's a big also topic on seclusion and uzla in spirituality in the Islamic tradition. And she said for sure, and other patients as well were actually really struggling, and they got a lot worse because of the pandemic. I think we can extract multiple questions from this example. Number one, how do you see yourself from your academic background and from your practice as well, the impact of the pandemic on people from a mental health perspective, and then later if you can also touch on the spirituality and how can we approach it from that perspective as well.
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. You know, anytime we have sort of a negative situation or stressor occur, in the literature we have this sort of discussion of reactions to trauma or acute distress, right? Environmental stimuli that present very difficult sort of stressors in our lives. But we have this kind of bell curve, right? If you think about it, most people in general, right, tend to not become clinically sick, but they may have some distress, and you have sort of a alignment in the middle. Oftentimes when we look at distress, we often look at the side of the bar, right, that's not doing well, the clinical side, right? And that's usually more of the exception than the rule, right? But nowadays, given the intensity of distress, I think we're going up in those numbers. But we also miss the other side of the bell curve, right? And the other side of the sort of outliers on the other side are individuals who are doing very well. And this is what we call post-traumatic growth, right? And so, you know, most people after acute distress, I mean, certainly during the middle of distress, they experience a lot of sort of anxiety or reactions and difficulty. It's a very human reaction. But there's a certain percentage, right, of the community, 15 to 20% or so, that ends up experiencing this post-traumatic growth, right? And this is the highly resilient, these individuals who initially have a dip, right, some sort of negative reaction, and then they grow from it. I think there's a lot of literature that's being focused on now on understanding rather from a deficit perspective as to how do you problem solve and deal with individuals who are experiencing problems from the positive, right? A strengths-based approach, kind of positive psychology that's looking at, you know, what's unique about these individuals that is kind of presenting them with the capacity to be able to deal with such situations. Yeah.
So how about the technological addiction when it comes to the pandemic, right? Everyone now is forced basically to use technology to manage most of their life daily matters, right? Literally almost every single thing.
Yes.
We're forced to be confined in very small spaces. We're forced to limit our interactions with people. So I know this is a multi-layer point, but specifically the technological addiction to screens, basically, to devices and internet, social media, and these things. I think it's also a big part. I think that was a highly expected topic to discuss today, specifically for the students' age. So I would really also like to get your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is a really, really good one. And I anticipated this kind of coming up because it's sort of on everybody's mind, and it's becoming, sort of a theme. Definitely, I think the technological addiction, right? I think the technology we're sort of forced to utilize. It's the sort of the blessing and the curse of the technology. On the one hand, we, are greatly benefiting from this forum. The opportunity of being able to be here today, for example, on this platform, utilizing Zoom, projecting to however many people are joining us on campus and off campus and from different parts of North America and maybe even the world, opens up an opportunity, right, for individuals to really connect. What would the pandemic be like if we didn't have opportunities of being able to get your mental health care done virtually, being able to talk to your imam and chaplain virtually, being able to attend class virtually? On the other side of the coin, though, there's also sort of the social media addiction and the technological addiction. It's like we're going, and we're as parents, we're also struggling with this as well with our children, but ourselves as well, obviously. It's like my youngest daughter, for example, once she's done her virtual school, what she wants to do is get on. She's like, oh, it's really cool. Now I want to get on and chat with my friends. And then I want to open up this really cool app and of photos, and she's making videos of herself and trying to play around with that. And one thing leads to another, and that's kind of the way that it's structured, right? It's designed that way. It's the web. Once you get in, you're kind of locked in the web. It takes you from one place to another, and you end up realizing, oh my goodness, I've spent my whole day just scrolling. But there is this sort of addiction, and I think the addiction, it kind of picking up on the notion of resilience and producing growth amidst distress, I think is our capacity of being able to be bored, as strange as it sounds, and this is, I tell this to parents as well, right? Like parents, for example, what they do, it's the easy route. What they want to do is they want to shut their kids up, right? So here's an iPad. Here's a TV screen. Here's this, here's that. I mean, that's the easy way out. That's the cop out. I mean, I'm guilty. We're probably guilty of some of it ourselves, right? I mean, we're not, there's no perfection here. I mean, we're not sort of expecting that everyone's going to be able to conquer this on all occasions. It's a struggle, right? But the issue is that by doing so, you don't develop the resiliency and the capacity of being able to tune into your own creativity, to being able to enjoy natural pleasures, to be able to enjoy and experience, salah, prayer, interaction. We've created the sort of ADHD-ness of our own minds, right? Like the sort of ADHD phenomenon where you can't sit there, you just click, 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 click. And what's happening on a brain level, you're having overstimulation, okay? And you're so used to all these colorful screens and clicking from here and doing this and doing that, that you pick up a book, right? And it's not the screen, it's not jumping out at you, right? The words are not jumping out at you. Nobody's acting, nobody's dramatizing anything for you, right? What do you need to do? You need to create what? As backwards or as ancient as it seems, creating imagery in your own mind, imagination, right? Creativity, interaction, critical thinking, reflection, right? And so if we're always click, 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 overstimulation, and then we come into Allahu Akbar, Salah, what's happening? All those colorful images, those stimulation, your brain is not stimulated in the same way anymore, right? And so this becomes problematic, and we create this almost like ADHD syndrome of being unable to enjoy natural pleasures. Like if you take a thing, stimulation is fine, right? We need some stimulation. In fact, the book I picked up is the book by Imam al-Birgawi, Al-Tariqa Muhammadiyya. And he has this reaction to extreme forms of spirituality, where he says that, there's a chapter on al-iqtisad fil a'mal, right? Having, judiciousness in your spiritual behaviors. And then in akhlaq sections, he talks about the need to actually have hobbies and relaxation that will rejuvenate you for prayer and for other things that seem kind of trivial. But the idea is that if we overdo this sort of, kind of engagement in these, overstimulatory exercises at the level of our body, we end up not being able to unlock, right, our spiritual potential. Because why? We live in the body, okay? From a spiritual perspective, that we live in the body, and that is the hedonistic, bodily, animalistic kind of level, which, by the way, does not produce happiness or satisfaction, because human beings are designed to live above that, right? We have a spiritual essence, and even when you look at positive psychology, that one of the interesting things that they talk about is individuals who live well, psychological well-being is associated with what? Meaningful, purposeful engagement in life, flow. You bring your purpose to the activities that you do. Animals don't do that. There's no higher order purpose for an animal. And what do our mashayikh say? These are the four things, right? قلة الكلام, قلة الطعام, قلة المنام, قلة الاختلاط مع الأنام. Reducing food, reducing sleep, reducing overspeaking, reducing excessive socialization. What does that do? Think about it. These are natural things you can't live without. We're social creatures, we have to speak. We're animals, we have to eat. We have to sleep. I'm not saying you don't do these things. You have to socialize with people. But if you can constrain or restrain these very natural biological drives, then you can actually restrain the unnatural drives, right? And so we have this addiction of overstimulation. We take a strawberry that's sweet on its own, you're gonna dip it in chocolate, right? And you're gonna overstimulate it. You're gonna eat a meal and we're gonna overstimulate it, add all the extra oil and the calories and this and that. You're gonna have a social interaction and we're gonna overstimulate it with what? With all of these flashy colors and pictures and 15 different friends at the same time that you can flip through screens about, and it is overstimulation, right? And then what? You sit across your friend and you can't pay attention to your spouse, to your child, to your father, your mother. It's a problem of overstimulation, right? And if we live in the body this way, we're not going to be able to unlock the spiritual joys, because why? The human being is composed of two parts. It's the jasad and the ruh. The body needs the dunya. It needs physical things. It needs food. It needs sleep. It needs nourishment, right? It needs these things to survive. But you cannot get satisfaction through the material things. In fact, psychological studies show that individuals who are more materialistic have greater psychological distress and psychological problems. And so what does that mean? When you unlock this potential of the spiritual potential, you live beyond the body, and you can't feed the soul food, physical food. What it needs, it's its own nourishment, right? Ala bi dhikrillah tatma'innu al-qulub, that this itmi'nan. What is itmi'nan? It's also a sakina, right? Of your limbs, this restlessness that we have, that we can't sit still. We have to have some sort of stimulation. And I think the pain, right, is going to give you that gain. The pain that you experience by being socially isolated, this khalwa and uzla, right, of being inside, but you're not going to experience it if you don't experience it. If you just sit in your house, you actually won't take the benefit of the forced isolation that you have, right? So what do? You get on this, and then what happens? You never benefit from the actual social isolation that you experience, right? And the people who are benefiting from it are adapting and taking this as an opportunity, right? Opportunity to do what? تفكروا في ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض. Sit, reflect about the creation of Allah. Go outside, touch soil, right? Look, smell the air, look at the sky, right? Interact with your mother and father without a phone in your hand, without a TV screen going on in the background, right? These are the natural joys, right? Learn how to cook, sit down and plan a meal, do meal planning, work on building your library, right? And reading, right? Develop your intellectual faculties. There's now all of these seminars and workshops and ilm, and what is that? You know, the hadith, Sheikh, موهومان لا يشبعان, right? موهوم في العلم لا يشبع منه وموهوم في الدنيا لا يشبع منها. That there are two greeds or things that people can get involved in, and those two preoccupations, you get preoccupied in the material, dunya, it will never satiate. This is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. You will never be satiated, but if you go into ilm and ruhaniyat and spirituality, that too won't satiate, but it will hit a different place. It will hit a different place where you can feel freed of the shackles of the dunya that were like locked. Why does the Prophet ﷺ said what? Al-ajizu man atba'a nafsahu hawahu wa tamanna ala Allah. Al-ajizu. What is very interesting, the language used here, right? That the incapacitated, the debilitated, that speaks to addiction. Al-ajizu man atba'a nafsahu hawahu. That he takes his self and he obeys it to its carnal, hedonistic, material desires. Makes it follow that. And what does the Prophet ﷺ say? لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. That none of you are a complete believer until your hawa, your desires, is in accordance with what I have sent. Right? And so the opposite is to train that hawa and take the opportunity to do what? Embrace the pain. Embrace the pain and you will have the gain. You cannot embrace it without the mujahada and the pain. It's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to go and say, okay, you know what? I embrace the pandemic. I'm going to embrace the social isolation and whatnot. I'm going to go in my room and say takbir Allahu Akbar after like stimulation. And one day, oh, now, you know, my carpet is going to start to fly. I became like Aladdin, right? in Aladdin, the Disney production, right, which is like grossly flawed in this caricature and portrayal of Muslims. It's like a kind of like the Taj Mahal in India, in like the desert in Arabia, and like, you know, a lion that speaks, and like a, you know, ajib kind of construction. But in any case, you're not gonna have this wilaya like just like this. Now it happens, right? Those are, oh, what about all these stories? But those are the exceptions of the rule, exceptions to the rule, right? But the general norm is it's a process. You're gonna have to build the muscle. The nafs muscle, the muscle needs to be built. We talk about the muscle of the nafs, right? You can handle more mashaqqa, more difficulty as you give it more, but that requires grief, that requires sadness. You have to cry over the fact that the dunya isn't the way it was before. You have to cry over the fact that you're isolated. And I don't mean that sarcastically. I'm not saying that in a demeaning way. I'm saying that for real. Allow yourself to feel the unpleasant experience, right? It's the withdrawal that you're going to experience. The restlessness that I can't let myself rest. The need to want to do something or fill. Stimulation. And then we end up what? Completely deprived. But this is our opportunity as believers. As a believer to rise above and elevate above the dunya, which now we realize is like not worth more than a wing of a mosquito, because, you know, like the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, we realize that reality because the dunya is ضيق جدا, right? It's very like constrained now and restrained, and we're having a difficult time making that adjustment. So I'm sorry I gave you a very long-winded answer to a very like short question.
Not at all. I really admire the way you took us in a journey into the human soul, and I also like the word the nafs muscles, right? And once you said that, I right away remembered the verse of Imam al-Busiri in his word that when he said, وَالنَّفْسُ كَالطِّفْلِ إِن تُهْمِلْهُ شَبَّ عَلَى حُبِّ الرَّضَاعِ وَإِن تَفْتِمْهُ يَنْفَطِمِ. He built this beautiful metaphor that a nafs is like an infant. If you neglect the proper care of the infant, he or she will grow up with extreme love to suckle, right? But وَإِن تَفْتِمْهُ يَنْفَطِمِ, if you wean it, it will be weaned. Let me just try to be, I mean, I know we don't like to use the word devil advocate, but just like in a metaphorical sense. Do you think there's a kind of a shift in the conventional understanding of technological or internet addiction? Or some people are trying to seek a redefinition of this concept given the current circumstances? Because now the issue is not anymore, I'm just scrolling in my Facebook app for a few hours a day, or my Instagram or Twitter, whatever app that people are, some people are obsessed with. I'm not just like following up with the news or games or whatever, all these things. Now, most, if not all of my life essentials are in this device, right? So now if I would actually take an overview of a full day of a person, for example, be a student or a professional, for example, a person would wake up in the morning, right away, barely wash their faces, right? If they would offer some nadduha or something, that would be perfect, right? And then right away needs to open the computer. He has lectures if he's a university student, and then he needs to catch up with other seminars, workshops, or trainings, or internships, or all these different activities that all happen online. Even shopping has become online. Even seeking sacred knowledge has become online, right? Now we offer most of the durus and most of the haqat online, right? So even some of the advice that Yousef gave, some people would say, okay, now you're asking me to widen my reading and my seeking of ilm. Now I'm having, alhamdulillah, more time through these screens to connect with the mashaykh and the scholars. So it's not anymore of being just this regular conventional understanding of addiction, and you tell me, okay, now we need to go and connect with the nature, or you need to go out, or you need to see people, because we're restricted in a way, right? So do you think this is a proper concern about this concept, that we need to a little bit think of it in a different way, or we should actually maintain the same level of, I don't know what is the proper word, but let's say like a level of probably aggression against technological addictions, and keep warning people against it, keep telling people, you know what, stay away from these things. We understand that you need them that much, but you still need to put your effort to keep some time, and to repeat the same list of advice that we would usually provide people with. I'm not sure if I'm making sense with this point. Yes. Try to raise a point that I've been hearing a lot.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. I think I totally understand what you're saying. My answer would be الضرورات تقدر بقدرها. Meaning, so there's this principle in fiqh, right? They say that necessities of the time is confined or measured only by the extent of the necessity. So, for example, somebody says, I'm stranded on I don't know, you need to take a medication that has there's no substitute, there's gelatin, or some sort of alcoholic ingredient in it. And you say, hey, you know what, there's no replacement. I have to take it. It's a durura, it's a necessity. But that doesn't mean now I'm going to eat gummy bears with it too. You see what I'm saying? So it's confined to the extent of that necessity, right? And so I think that's important, number one. Number two, when there's no water, we have to make tayammum. But we also have to still remember that the asl is water. Okay? That the best and the origin is water. Okay? There's all this fascinating research now happening about what is the impact of taking a social, mobile, interactive, tactile, touching, feeling, smelling, thinking, visualizing being, and confining them in a room to a screen. There is absolutely no doubt about the fact that this is going to hurt us. Okay? This is going to hurt us. And it is. There's enough, all the light rays that are going in that are causing sleeplessness, the fatigue. We feel more fatigued watching a screen and talking to somebody in a meeting than actual in face-to-face encounters. There's all of this reaction. So I think we have to realize that we have to avail ourselves of the need for these types of equipment and technology and durus and halaqat, but lament over the fact that I'm not going to be able to sit in a halaqah. But you have to keep a balance, meaning that, like, okay, I just sat on a screen watching for a halaqah. That's great, because it's a paradox, right? Somebody be like, oh, you're telling me not get on a screen, but you're on a screen, you're talking to us. I mean, this event is on a screen. I mean, should we have not attended then? Should we have been sitting in our rooms and doing dhikr or going outside and like rolling around in the dirt then? Is that what you're saying? No, that's not necessarily what I'm saying. What I am saying is that there has to be, we can't keep balance, but at least survival, right? Because I would say balance, but you can't have balance. This isn't balance. It's very imbalanced, right? But we have to try to keep some degree of sanity, humanness, right? And I think that's where, we need to be able to, embrace some of the social isolation. Be with yourself and Allah Ta'ala, okay? Be with yourself and your salah and your dhikr. Be with yourself and your spouse if you're married. Be with you and your children if we have to be with our immediate family members. Be with your parents if they live with you, or if there's no constraints in visiting them, then visit them. You see what I'm saying? Go outside and take walks, ride bikes, develop hobbies, use tactile things, like get into carpentry, get into arts and crafts, like do things that are necessary that don't involve you sitting in front of a screen. Yes, sit in front of a screen for your school, for your papers, for this and that, but print your papers out, maybe read it from a sheet. You see what I'm saying? Like, get away from the impact of just being on the screen. And then the other thing is, min husni islam al-mar'i tarkuhu ma la ya'nih, right? The other thing is, okay, yes, you need to have a halaqah. Yes, you need to go to a meeting. Yes, you need to go to class. But do you need to know what's going on with Trump's, whatever, like secret affairs that he's having, or, all of these, the nonsense that's going on, or what's happening on social media and this action. You can use social media responsibly. Okay, we have Twitter accounts, right? Say, the Sheikh has Sheikh Yusuf, he has a Twitter account, we follow and we benefit. Okay, but give yourself a period of time. Say, okay, I'm going to use half an hour a day. Give yourself a structure of predictability. Sit there, go through it, and say, I need to catch up on my social media activity. Do not, and this is what the addiction happens. Is this, you have to ask yourself this question. Is this decision to engage in this behavior coming from my aql, from my mind, or is it on autopilot drive from my nafs? You see? And I think you know the difference. We know the difference. I know I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is a waste of time. I don't know why I'm doing this. There's so many things that I could be doing right now. Like, did I make dhikr today? No, I didn't. But, I'll do it after. And you can recognize in yourself that you are doing that. And so I think this is where we find that it becomes problematic. I know I'm to make the distinction.
Yeah, so I understand that what you were saying is it's a circumstantial situation. We shouldn't actually embrace it or adopt it as the new norm from the perspective that we're actually talking about now, right? And I think it's a great advice that we keep in mind that this is not the asl, right? It's very important, and I believe it's a very important spiritual principle as well, that sometimes you need, even though you're practicing something different given some circumstances, not breaking anything that is haram for sure, but having the main principle, or the main asl as we call it, fixed in our minds and reminding ourselves of this principle all the time is actually very important for spiritual well-being as well. Sure. Speaking of the pandemic, probably this is an extension of the question. There are a lot of events, a lot of seminars and workshops on the effects and the impacts on these things. And I know we don't really have much time, but I think two of the most common symptoms that I think they can be intersectional between spirituality and mental health as well is the uncertainty, whether it comes to fear about health, fear of being infected, fear about rizq, fear about any of the logistics of this life, the restrictions of moving, and all these things. So uncertainty is one. The other one is loneliness, or the social isolation. In a kind of a nutshell, how or what is the best way of addressing these two problems?
Yeah.
And I would really like if you can cater it to youth or students, to be honest, just to make it very specific to our audience. That would be also perfect as well. And for sure, it can be also general for everybody as well.
For sure, absolutely. I mean, in terms of the fear of getting sick, I think it's a real fear, right? I mean, we're not sort of, sort of imagining this disease. It's real, it's there, and we have to take the precautions. I mean, I think that there's that aspect about bain al-khawfi wal raja, right, between fear and hope in our tradition. The idea of, so what is the function of anxiety? First of all, let's understand that. The function of anxiety, right, is when something feels out of control and that there's a potential negative future event that can happen in front of us, you go into a bodily fight or flight response. That's normal. That's adaptive. That's healthy, right? It's not a bad thing. And what that does is it causes you to prepare, okay? So you prepare and you say, okay, I'm gonna take the appropriate precautions. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure I wear a mask. I don't go to like hugely, non-essential, huge public gatherings where people are very much in close proximity. I do my due diligence. You see what I'm saying? Now you've done your homework, you do a little bit of homework, you have to separate between what is a myth, and what is a real fear, being able to do that education. And then you direct your plans. You make tadbir. You say, okay, I'm gonna make a plan, I'm gonna construct my repertoire. The anxiety may not necessarily go away there all entirely, right? Because of the impending doom. But there's two things that we can do. One is, at this point, this is, tawakkul, right? Like there's no control. This is where Imam al-Ghazali, for example, says, it's like you plant your seeds, put the soil in, you get the good sunlight in, but you don't control the outcome. In our creed, we believe in occasionalism, right? We don't believe this concept of occasionalism is that, it's kind of important to understand, is that everything almost happens coincidentally, meaning that a knife cutting, right, is at the same time as you put the knife down, Allah's willing for it to cut. The knife actually isn't cutting. It's Allah Ta'ala is giving it the capacity to cut, and this is very important because we have, COVID vaccination, we have social isolation. But wait, what about like tawakkul? What about kafaratul dhunub? What about these raja? What about these concepts, right? And as believers, our repertoire becomes like way beyond just this sort of, check the news every day for the vaccine and then take all the social precautions. There's a little bit more involved there. If you get sick, there's a concept in psychology, right? They say acting as if. So as ironic as it sounds, you act as if you got the disease already. And then what do? You cope with it, right? And you say, okay, what would you do rather than I can't get it? No, you could get it. It's not beyond you, right? It's possible. Allah may or may not put the effect in your social isolation. For example, just to raise the anxiety of our listeners, there's a person that, a neighbor of a friend of ours, she was social isolating. She went out once in like 40 days. This is a real khalwa, right? experience. 40 days, she goes out once and she caught COVID. Is it possible? It's possible. Okay, so then what are we going to do about that? It's possible. So then you say it's kafaratul dhunub, that Allah Ta'ala is going to erase my sins, that I have tawakkul in Allah Ta'ala, that He knows and can will and do what He wants with the slave of His. And whatever is written for me, my qadr, I'm not going to be able to escape it. And that my belief in a merciful Lord, amazing is the matter of the believer, everything for him is khair. And that's not for everybody except for Muslims. It's just a very specific prescription for Muslims, right? And so we say, okay, great. This allows you to let go of control. Control is good. You get anxiety and you want control. That's good. But we have this law of diminishing return in anxiety, that once it hits its optimal point, any more of that goes downhill. I tell my OCD patients, I say, is there, can you have more perfect than perfect? No. Whenever you have more of something that's perfect, it becomes imperfect because it's supposed to be just like that amount. So I say, so if you did wudu and you wash yourself 3 times, you say, you know what, I'm going to make it more perfect. I'm going to wash myself 5 times. Is that more perfect? No. It's a diminishing return. It's less perfect. You see what I'm saying? So control, you have control. Again, there's sort of a range, right, based upon expert advice and talking to physicians and whatnot, and then you exert it. The rest you have to put in Allah Ta'ala's hands ultimately to say that, I need to act as if, right, with 2 things, catastrophize. I'm not going to catastrophize, right, make it more than it is, because the reality is what? 3, let's say even maximum is a high number, 10% of people get sick. That's still 10%. 90% don't get sick. And then of the 10%, how many of them are asymptomatic? So actually, it's not that bad, right? This is just an anxiety tool, right? Like to tell yourself this. That's one thing, rationalize, right? Address the distortion. The other piece is, so what? Let's say I'm the 10%. So they say every time you ask what if, put a so in front of it. They say, so what if? So what do? You minimize it. You say, so what? And I'll handle it. But don't kind of lose sleep over something that hasn't occurred yet. It's like, okay, I did all of my part, but I'm going to stress over something that hasn't actually happened. And then that's what? ضياعة الموجود لطلب المفقود, right? You're just wasting the moment in seeking something that's already like beyond your control, or it's already gone, So that's the answer about like anxiety. Social isolation is for real. I mean, it's we have to flip social isolation into the medicine. I think I spoke about it. Embrace social isolation, turn it as an opportunity to connect with Allah Ta'ala. You're never isolated when Allah Ta'ala is with you, right? Embrace yourself. Read the hikayat of the Sahaba, right? Read about the hayat of Sahaba, the lives of the Sahaba. Read the story of the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You're not alone. Trust me. You take a tasbih, send salawat upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It will be sent to him on Fridays. Okay. Maybe Allah Ta'ala will privilege you with socialization in your dreams. That's really amazing of the believer, right? One of the mashayikh used to say, rahimahullah ta'ala, our grand sheikh, he just passed away recently. He used to get upset when people would wake him up. He would get up, he would wake up from his sleep, and somebody would wake him up, and he would say, he'd get upset. Why'd you wake me up? And then they thought, what kind of sheikh is this? He just like loves to sleep, And then somebody found out and asked him, and he said, I regularly see the Prophet ﷺ in my dreams. And he said, you're taking me away from the face of my beloved to your face. How can I not be angry with you? You see? And so I think the social isolation, yes, there's social, I'm not going to deny it, I'm going to minimize it. It's a reality to that. And people struggle. But I think we have to take it and embrace and adapt and turn a tragedy into an opportunity.
Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh. I really like the way you linked some of these points fundamentally to theology and to aqidah, because I think it's very effective, right? When you mentioned the example of occasionalism or this complex issue of causality and life, and how the asbab run in this life, and who is the actual cause of things, subhanahu wa ta'ala. I know we believe these things sometimes just like as general, nice, beautiful principles that we believe in them, and we know that they are part of the articles of faith, but when you reflect on them deeply and you understand that وَكُلُّ أَمْرٍ بِالْقَضَاءِ وَالْقَدَرِ, that nothing happens except by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you think of concepts like rizq, for example, right? And you see the theological definition of rizq in Islam, which contradicts a lot of other definitions of rizq. That is the famous point in al-Jawhara, وَالرِّزْقُ عِنْدَ الْقَوْمِ مَا بِهِ انْتُفِعُ. What you actually use, what you actually benefit. This just one small has a lot of spiritual manifestations in our life as well. And it's a beautiful and intriguing also that there is this important intersection between theology and spirituality. That's why I try always to advocate for the importance and the significance of theology. It really matters a lot. Spirituality is important for sure. A person needs it to go hand in hand with the practice of the deed and the fiqh part of our religion, but the theological background has to always be there to support and to back up our understandings of all these concepts, patience, tawakkul, asbab, all these different terms that you actually mentioned as well. When we speak of isolation, right? And now I think there are a lot of references and citations for this concept in spirituality and the uzla literature in the tazkiyah or the spirituality literature. Imam al-Ghazali, for example, talking about seclusion, and he based it, or a big part of it at least, on the seclusion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the beginning of the da'wah. What was also interesting, as far as I remember, he taught about 6 benefits of seclusion, and then he taught about 6 harms of seclusion as well, right? And he tried to draw the balance between the good and the bad of the seclusion. This is a separate topic itself, but just like a random point that literally came to my mind right now is, can we characterize our situation to be actually the seclusion that those scholars were talking about? Can I consider myself in seclusion if I'm all day on my screens and all day I'm texting, calling, in events? Does the spiritual characterization of seclusion apply to the situation, or no? I do need actually to apply exactly as it was mentioned and characterized by the scholars. And I would just take the current situation of the pandemic to be a motivation or a facilitation for this, right? What do you think about the understanding, the modern understanding of seclusion when it comes to this?
Yeah, I think the answer is contained within your question, Sheikh. I mean, you mentioned the fact that you sort of alluded to the idea of using this opportunity as motivation, flipping it into an opportunity, and the catastrophe into an opportunity. I say to some of my patients that come to see me that because they're like mandated by some spouse or family member or even the court, and they're like, I really don't want to be here. I was like, well, you know what? I really don't want to be with a person that doesn't want to be with me either, but we kind of have to spend this time together, so we might as well make the most of it, you know? What do you want to do? What do I want to do? I really don't want to have this time where we're having this weirdly tense, like long hour. So how would you like to use it? How would I like to use it, you know? So, you know, use it as a motivation, get you in there, but you have to block off time. It is not isolation if you are on your phone. It is not isolation if you're on technology. If you're all of these sorts of, you know, ways of, this is escapism, in fact. This is escapism. You're running away from isolation. And this is what they say, you know, exposure therapy, right? Essentially the thing that you're afraid of, very age-old wisdom, face the thing that you're afraid of. Right? You'll never get past it unless you go through it. And you'll never enjoy it unless you learn to get past the initial phase of non-enjoyment or the pain. There's a pain phase, right? And once you get past that pain phase is when you'll enjoy it. But if you never embrace that phase, if you keep running away every time you come to that phase, you'll never experience the actual joy of it. And trust me, when you get it, you'll have this skill in your life, inshallah ta'ala, and this capacity that will like be a lifesaver for a long time, inshallah.
There's a question that actually came about, and it's pretty related to the technological addiction, and I think especially for younger kids and teens. What is the healthy and good amount of screen time for kids and high school students?
Yeah, I mean, in general, the less the better. But the thing is that, you know, you're forced by occasion. So I would say the current necessary amount is way beyond the health recommendations, right? I'm talking about psychological health, right? Like mental health recommendations for screen time. However, they're forced, and so you really, really honestly want to limit it outside of that. I mean, it's good for kids, for example, from a social isolation perspective, needing to like FaceTime a grandmother, grandfather, or maybe have like a weekly group Zoom call with their friends, for example, just to talk about anything, right? Children talking about interacting. So you have to counterbalance these things, right? Like you don't want to lose the socializing element of it in play due to this side. So it's really walking a tightrope, but the principle is that what is necessary, whatever is considered non-essential or growth promoting, because look, there's many needs we have, right? Intellectual needs, social needs. So we don't have water, we have to use tayammum. So it's got to get done, right? We're going to use it. But if you don't need it, then don't use it anymore. You see what I'm saying? Don't just give them free rein to just go off on their own. There's lots of literature on the effects of children. There's lots of theories about Asperger's syndrome, autism spectrum disorders, for example, originating in this idea of the lack of social development. Children are kind of glued to screens and video games and live in nuclear families, right? Unlike collectivistic constructs where they don't learn social cues. They don't learn how to appropriately socialize with people. And so I'm talking about mild, obviously, more severe autism is more biological, but mild Asperger's type syndromes. There's all this literature on the explosion of ADHDs has to do with the kind of divided mind, problem. So these are, Abu Zayd al-Balkhi in his Risala talks about early on this idea of the cluttered mind, for example, and he talks about, there's internal causers of sickness, external causers of sickness, stress from outside, and negative people, don't surround yourself with negative people, but inside it's the negative self-talk. And he talks about have taghaful, like be heedless of like things you don't need to get involved in because it creates this clutter in your mind, right? And we've like magnified clutter. I mean, he's talking about in his time. Like he's talking about going to a market and listening to people talking. You see what I'm saying? And we're talking about like, I mean, imagine the clutter we have. Like, how can you have you focus the mind in a forcibly divided like attention, world where we're always being called to divide our attention?
There is another question that says there has been an increase in recent years in ASMR and sensory audio kinetic videos online. Does that go in line with our need for sensory overstimulation? Should these kinds of videos be avoided?
Is this ASMR? Is what?
It's on Zoom, the question.
Yeah.
The last question, actually.
Yeah, sensory audio kinetic videos online. Okay, like, yeah, I can't really speak to it because I'm not familiar with it, to be quite honest. So,
I think there is a kind of an explanation. For example, when you like to hear certain sounds, like background typing sounds.
Okay.
White noise. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, I mean, I think it's used as a tool. Like white noise and sounds like waterfalls and whatever. I think those can be used as tools to get started, but you want to get into the process of being able to get away from these crutches. And we have this kind of, this is called this in psychology, like the cocktail party effect, right? Like where you have the capacity, despite noise in your environment, to be able to zoom in on a conversation with somebody to such an extent where this background noise almost disappears. And that's what focused attention is. It's not that there's no noise around you anymore. I'm talking about internally in your mind or even in your environment. Like I tell my anxiety patients, the difference between you and I is not that I don't have the same thoughts you have. The difference is that the thoughts just act as background noise that I'm barely aware of. You see what I'm saying? And so that's the goal. It's not that it's going to just disappear, but it will slowly start to kind of fade into the background. And that's the goal, because what, you're never going to get rid of shaitan. Shaitan is always going to be there with waswasa. It's never going to go away. We believe this in our kind of ontology, right? Imam al-Ghazali talks about, thoughts, khawatir, that come from shaitan is waswasa, and from the angels is from ilham. We have these voices that are happening in our head, and they're not hallucinations, right? They're not voices like you hear voices in your head in that way, but we have these voices, and being able to kind of benefit from the beneficial ones and to kind of discard the other ones is sort of the goal. Not that you have an absence, complete silence in your head. That's not the goal. And that's what Eastern Buddhist, meditation is attempting to do. We don't believe in that. You don't want to silence your mind entirely. You want to create tafakkur, contemplation, actually. So it's actually focused attention. It's not the absence of attention.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh. I know we're almost, I think, done with the time. I would just appreciate it if you give us a couple more minutes I have two questions actually, but I'm going to try to just ask them together, and I think they would probably be a good conclusion for the event, inshallah. The first one, I think, and it's also appropriate given some of the advice they shared with us already, so it will be beneficial for the audience. Do you have any recommendation of a book, given the recommendation of we need to connect more aside from the screens with books and ilm? That a book in a simple language that talks about general concepts of mental health with some spiritual background, and this, I understand the big part of the Khalil Center work is the integration. So if there was any book that would be simple in language, probably small in size, that would fit for the average person to just read and benefit from, specifically given these current circumstances. This is the first question. The second question, if you can just give us some concluded remarks about Khalil Center work, and specifically in Canada, how can we access the work? How can we access their services? That would be also probably beneficial for all the audience and all of us, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah, no problem. To the first one, in terms of book recommendations, honestly, I would say, they should ask you, Sheikh, in terms of like spiritual reading resources. I think those are perhaps best in these times for the average Muslim, right? That is trying to develop a connection. However, if an individual is struggling with more serious kinds of concerns that are beyond, say, being able to kind of pick up and gain some perspective, there's a number of things that we can recommend. You can feel free to email me as well. I can make some recommendations. One that comes to my mind around anxiety and cluttered mind and thoughts is the happiness trap. So I think that's kind of a good resource. It takes sort of a perspective on, disempowering your negative thoughts and your negative thinking. And so I think that's sort of along the lines of literature that I could recommend that would maybe like a layman's easy read type of thing. And then there's a lot of others. There's some provocative ones that are really good that I can recommend, but people can email me maybe if they're interested, inshallah. Yeah. Oh, the Khalil Center in Canada. Right now everything's kind of virtual anyway. So, where you access Khalil Center is almost in the online world. Oftentimes for mental health care, there are some state or provincial regulations. So that's why you might need to be channeled into one office versus another. Currently, all of our offices are virtual. The three main things that we do across our centers is we provide mental health services. So that includes psychotherapy, psychological testing and assessment, and psychiatric care even. And we do that online. We also have religious consultations. So for example, somebody has a mental health related issue, but they need a fatwa or they need to discuss it in the context of a religious assessment. Then we have a psychologist and a scholar kind of work together to come up with sort of the plan of action for that individual, kind of custom tailored to the needs of the individual. So this is sort of our mental health services, and we have support groups as well. And then the other piece is more of our educational seminars and workshops. and classes. And so you just sign on to the mailing list to learn more about and to be involved in. There's a couple of support groups that are going on for those that want kind of a group to connect with. You can get involved in that arena. So I think those are the two major sources and services that are sort of available for our community where they're struggling and they kind of need some help and they would like to connect. They can get on the website and access all of that. You can even book an appointment directly from the website. Yeah, and we also have the crisis helpline as well. Limited hours. People can call the crisis line if they're experiencing an acute, urgent issue, and or their family members are, and they kind of don't know what to do or how to navigate the mental health system. They kind of feel stuck and they're not sure what they can do for this person.
Great, mashallah. May Allah bless you and bless your work, inshallah. Just to correct me if I'm wrong, there's only one office in Canada, the Toronto office,
Correct.
right?
Correct. It's the Toronto office. That's
okay, mashallah. Are there any plans for more expansions? And I understand now everything is virtual, but probably making some other services accessible in other provinces or cities?
We've halted all expansions at this moment just because of being able to manage organizationally kind of the various offices across the country. We're sort of directing some of our attention more towards training and internships and developing of students and whatnot that can actually go off and serve their communities, hopefully, where Khalil Center may not exist, inshallah.
MashaAllah. May Allah bless you again and bless everyone, inshallah. All the Khalil Center staff and volunteers, inshallah. May Allah bless all of you and accept your work. And again, I really thank you so much for this insightful and thought-provoking session. Forgive us for the 10 extra minutes, but I think, alhamdulillah, was really beneficial. And I hope it's not the last time, inshallah, we host you in some of our functions. Again, I would really like to extend my gratitude, and on behalf of the Muslim Chaplaincy and the University of Windsor, I would like to thank you and thank everybody who attended and all the participants with their questions and comments. Barakallahu feekum, jazakumullah khairan. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless all of you and to forgive our sins and shortcomings, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.